The dim hum of failing power systems echoed through the Elysium, accompanied by the sharp hiss of pressurized air as the cryosleep pods began to release their occupants. The ship's pristine white interiors, once a testament to humanity's technological prowess, were now cracked and faded. Dust particles floated lazily in the weightless void of the damaged chamber as emergency lighting flickered in erratic bursts. Captain Alina Voss was the first to awaken. She gasped for air as her pod hissed open, her body trembling from the aftereffects of centuries in cryosleep. Her mind raced to piece together her surroundings, but the disorienting haze of stasis clung to her thoughts. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Her room wasn't bathed in the welcoming blue glow of functioning systems. Instead, it felt cold, lifeless, like a graveyard adrift in the void. Stumbling to her feet, Alina blinked through the darkness. "Ship I," she croaked, her voice weak. "Status report." A pause followed, filled with only the faint crackling of the ship's comm system. Finally, the AI's voice sputtered to life, distorted and struggling to communicate. Cryosleep. Terminated. Systems. Critical failure. Mission. Timeline breach. Estimated time elapsed. 742 years past initial destination window. Alina froze. 742 years, she whispered, her blood running cold. Before she could process the enormity of the situation, another cryosleep pod hissed open. Lieutenant Jonas Price, her trusted second-in-command, staggered out, coughing violently. His gaze met hers, wide with confusion. "Captain," Jonas rasped, "what the hell happened? Why are we—" "I don't know," Alina interrupted, steadying him. "But the ship's been adrift for centuries. Something went catastrophically wrong." The two worked quickly, moving between cryopods to awaken the others. Within minutes, a handful of key personnel were conscious, though their faces betrayed the same mixture of fear and disorientation. Dr. Leah Hargrove, the ship's lead biologist, knelt beside a shattered console, her fingers trembling as she tried to access the logs. "The data's corrupted," she muttered. "Most of the records are unreadable, but there's something here, a fragment." Alina leaned over her shoulder, her jaw tightening as she read the garbled text. "Distress signal received. Unauthorized course adjustment. External breach detected," she murmured, piecing together the fragmented message. "We weren't just lost. Something interfered with us." A loud metallic groan reverberated through the ship, silencing the group. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was deliberate, like the low growl of an unseen predator. "What was that?" Jonas whispered, his hand instinctively moving to the sidearm clipped to his belt. Alina's eyes narrowed as she straightened. "Something's here with us," she said grimly. "Get the lights online. Now." The team scattered, frantically working to restore power. Emergency panels flickered to life, illuminating the room in stark red. The ship's interior looked worse than they'd thought. Bulkheads warped from damage, conduits spilling wires like the exposed nerves of a dying creature. Dr. Hargrove let out a sharp gasp, drawing everyone's attention. She was staring at a faint mark etched into the wall. A symbol, alien in design, glowing faintly with an eerie green light. "That wasn't there before," she whispered. Jonas stepped closer, his weapon drawn. "Captain," he said, his voice tense, "I think we got bigger problems than just being lost." Before Alina could respond, the lights surged, momentarily bathing the room in brilliant white before plunging them back into darkness. In that fleeting moment, they all saw it, a shadow moving in the distance, just beyond the doorway. "Everyone, arm yourselves," Alina ordered, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "We're not alone." The crew moved with military precision, years of training kicking in despite their terror. As they readied themselves for the unknown, the ship groaned again, the sound growing louder, more deliberate. Alina tightened her grip on her weapon, her gaze locked on the dark corridor ahead. Whatever had brought them here wasn't done with them yet. The flickering emergency lights painted the corridor in jagged strokes of red and black as Captain Alina Voss led her crew cautiously down the passageway. Every sound seemed amplified: the hiss of depressurized pipes, the hum of malfunctioning systems, and the faint, rhythmic thud of boots against the metal floor. "Stay close," Alina commanded in a low voice, her sidearm steady in her hand. Jonas followed just behind her, his weapon sweeping from side to side, while Dr. Leah Hargrove clutched a handheld scanner, its screen alive with erratic readings. "This makes no sense," Leah murmured, her eyes darting between the scanner and the walls around her. "I'm picking up energy signatures that shouldn't exist. It's almost like..." She hesitated. "Like what?" Jonas pressed, his voice sharp. Leah swallowed hard. "Like something's alive in the walls." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but before anyone could respond, a loud metallic clang echoed through the corridor. Everyone froze. "Movement. Left flank," Jonas whispered, aiming his weapon toward a branching corridor. Alina held up a hand to signal a halt. Her eyes scanned the dimly lit passage, and she gestured for Leah to use the scanner. Leah nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she aimed the device toward the sound. "Nothing," Leah said after a tense moment. "There's no heat signature, no mass. But the energy spike is off the charts." Jonas cursed under his breath. "Whatever it is, it's not playing by our rules." Alina motioned for the team to move forward, keeping their formation tight. The corridor led them to a massive bulkhead that was partially ajar, its edges warped as though it had been forced open. Beyond it lay the ship's central control hub, a cavernous room dominated by an enormous, shattered viewport. Through the viewport, the black void of space stretched endlessly, but something about it seemed wrong. Faint tendrils of green light wove through the darkness, pulsating like veins in a living organism. "Is that outside the ship?" Jonas asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Leah shook her head, her gaze fixed on the glowing tendrils. "No, it's inside. Those things are in our hull." Before they could process the revelation, the emergency lights flickered violently, plunging the room into complete darkness. A low, guttural sound, like the distorted growl of a predator, rumbled through the air. "Hold positions." Alina barked, her voice cutting through the pitch black. A moment later, the lights flickered back on, revealing the room. Everything seemed the same, except for one detail: a crew member, Specialist Torres, who had been stationed at the rear of their group, was gone. "Torres," Jonas shouted, spinning around. Alina's jaw tightened as she surveyed the room. "Stay focused. We don't split up." Leah pointed toward the warped bulkhead. "Captain, look." Etched into the wall next to the bulkhead was another glowing symbol, identical to the one they had seen earlier. But this time, it was larger, pulsating faintly as though alive. Jonas stepped closer, his weapon raised. "What the hell does it mean?" Before anyone could speculate, the growling sound returned, closer this time, more menacing. The room's temperature seemed to plummet, frost forming along the edges of the shattered viewport. Then, from the corner of the room, something emerged. It was barely visible, a shifting distortion in the air, like a ripple in water. As it moved, the faint green glow of the symbol seemed to intensify, casting an eerie light on the crew. "Contact," Jonas shouted, opening fire. The sound of gunfire filled the room, but the bullets passed harmlessly through the distortion, striking the far wall. The creature, or whatever it was, seemed to react, its form becoming more defined. Faint outlines of spindly limbs and a grotesque, elongated head took shape, its eyes glowing with a sickly green hue. Alina didn't hesitate. "Fall back. Regroup at the armory," she ordered. The crew retreated, weapons trained on the advancing entity. As they exited the control hub, the bulkhead slammed shut behind them with a deafening crash. Panting, Alina turned to her team. "We're not dealing with anything human," she said grimly. "Whatever's on this ship isn't just an intruder. It's hunting us. In the silence that followed, the ship groaned again, almost as if it were alive, its haunting wail a reminder that their fight for survival had only just begun. The sound of their hurried footsteps echoed down the empty corridor as Captain Alina Voss led her crew toward the armory. Every flicker of the emergency lights cast shifting shadows on the walls, playing tricks on their already frayed nerves. Behind them, the faint sound of metallic groans and the distant guttural growls of the entity followed, like a predator stalking its prey. "Keep moving," Elena barked, glancing over her shoulder to ensure the team stayed together. Jonas was at the rear, his weapon raised and eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Leah clutched her scanner tightly, her face pale with fear. "How is it even doing that?" Leah asked, her voice trembling. "Moving through walls, vanishing into thin air. It defies physics." "We'll figure it out," Elena replied, her tone sharp. "But first, we arm ourselves. Whatever that thing is, it's not unstoppable." They reached the armory door, a thick, reinforced slab of titanium designed to withstand the worst the universe could throw at them. Jonas moved to the control panel, his fingers flying across the cracked screen as he bypassed the damaged security protocols. "Hurry up, Jonas," Elena urged, her weapon aimed down the corridor. "I'm working as fast as I can." Jonas shot back. The growling sound grew louder, accompanied by a faint clicking noise that sent shivers down their spines. Leah's scanner began to beep erratically, its readings spiking into the red. "It's close," she whispered. Jonas muttered a curse as sparks flew from the control panel. "Got it," he shouted as the door slid open with a grating screech. The team rushed inside, and Jonas slammed the door shut behind them, locking it manually. The growling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The armory was a stark contrast to the rest of the ship. The walls gleamed with polished steel, and rows of weapons and equipment were neatly arranged in racks and compartments. It was a small comfort in an otherwise chaotic situation. Elena immediately took charge. "Jonas, get the heavy ordnance. Leah, scan the room for any anomalies. I don't want that thing sneaking up on us again." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their training overriding their fear. Jonas retrieved plasma rifles, energy grenades, and combat armor, distributing them to the team. Leah's scanner beeped as she swept it over the walls, her brow furrowing. "There's residual energy here," she said, her voice hushed. "The same signature as those symbols. It's faint, but it's present." Elena frowned. "So it's been here before." Leah nodded. "Or it's leaving traces of itself wherever it goes. Either way, it's not random. It's deliberate." As the crew armed themselves, the lights in the armory flickered. A cold breeze swept through the room, impossible in the sealed environment. "Did anyone else feel that?" Jonas asked, his voice tight. Before anyone could answer, a loud clang echoed from the door. The crew froze, weapons raised, as the sound repeated, something heavy slamming against the reinforced titanium. "It's trying to get in," Lee whispered, her eyes wide. Elena stepped forward, her expression hard. "Then let it try. This time, we're ready." The pounding grew louder, more insistent, as if the entity were testing the door's strength. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, charged with an unnatural energy that made the hair on their arms stand on end. "Captain," Jonas said, his voice low, "if that thing breaks through, we'll need more than just firepower. We need a plan." Elena nodded, her mind racing. "We don't know what we're dealing with, but we know it's drawn to those symbols." "Leah, can you figure out what they mean?" "I can try," Leah replied, already pulling up the data she had collected earlier. The door groaned under the relentless assault, cracks beginning to form in the reinforced metal. The team braced themselves, weapons trained on the door. "Whatever it is, we hold the line," Elena said, her voice steady. "This ship is our home. We take it back." The pounding stopped abruptly, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. For a brief moment, the crew dared to hope the entity had retreated. But then, from the far corner of the room, the shadows began to shift. The shifting shadows in the corner of the armory twisted unnaturally, stretching and contorting like a living entity. The faint glow of green light began to seep from the edges of the darkness, casting an otherworldly hue over the room. "Contact!" Jonas shouted, training his plasma rifle on the moving void. Alina held up a fist, signaling the team to hold fire. "Wait," she said, her voice steady but taut. "Let it reveal itself. We don't waste ammunition on shadows." The crew stood frozen, their weapons aimed at the corner. The shadows coalesced, forming the faint outline of the entity they had seen before. This time, it was larger, its spindly limbs stretching unnervingly, as if it were testing the boundaries of the room. Its glowing eyes locked onto them, and a low guttural growl reverberated through the air. Leah's scanner beeped wildly, the screen awash with chaotic data. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling, "it's generating some kind of field. It's not just a creature. It's manipulating the environment around it. Can you disrupt it?" Alina asked, her eyes never leaving the entity. Leah hesitated, frantically tapping at her scanner. "Maybe. If I can match its frequency, I might be able to destabilize it. But I'll need time." "Then make it quick," Alina said. "Jonas, cover her. Everyone else, stay sharp." The entity took a step forward, its movements unnatural and jerky, as if it were a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. The air grew colder with each passing second, and a faint humming noise began to fill the room, like a chorus of dissonant whispers. "Whatever it's doing, it's ramping up," Jonas shouted. Alina gritted her teeth. "Leah, now would be a good time." "I'm working on it." Leah snapped, her fingers flying across the scanner's interface. She connected the device to a nearby console, attempting to amplify its output. The entity lunged forward suddenly, closing the distance in an instant. Jonas opened fire, his plasma rifle unleashing a barrage of searing bolts. The shots struck the entity, but instead of causing damage, they passed through it, dispersing into the walls. "Damn it, it's not physical," Jonas yelled. Alina fired as well, aiming for the glowing eyes. The entity recoiled slightly, the light in its eyes dimming for a brief moment before flaring back to life. "It's reacting to energy," Alina realized. "Leah, focus on the symbols. They're the key." Leah nodded, her hands trembling as she adjusted the scanner. "Almost there. Just a few more seconds." The entity growled louder, its form shifting as it extended a shadowy limb toward Jonas. The limb passed through his chest, and he let out a choked gasp, collapsing to his knees. "Jonas!" Alina shouted, rushing to his side. She grabbed him by the shoulder, pulling him back as the entity advanced. Leah's scanner emitted a high-pitched whine, followed by a burst of energy that filled the room. The green glow surrounding the entity flickered, and it let out a piercing shriek, its form beginning to destabilize. "It's working," Leah cried. "But it's not enough. I need more power." Alina grabbed a nearby energy grenade, activating it and throwing it directly at the entity. The grenade detonated midair, releasing a burst of concentrated energy that engulfed the creature. The entity shrieked again, its form unraveling like threads pulled from a tapestry. For a brief moment, it seemed to dissipate entirely, the shadows retreating back into the corner. The room fell silent, the only sounds being the crew's ragged breathing. Jonas coughed, clutching his chest where the entity had touched him. "What the hell was that?" he rasped. Alina helped him to his feet, her expression grim. "That was just the beginning. Leah, any idea what we're dealing with?" Leah stared at the scanner, her face pale. "It's not just a creature, it's a sentient energy. And it's using this ship to feed, to grow stronger." Alina's jaw tightened. "Then we need to find its source. If we don't stop it now, it won't just destroy us. It'll consume everything." As the team regrouped, the faint hum of the entity's presence returned, echoing through the walls like a haunting melody. Time was running out, and the battle for survival had only just begun. The hum resonated through the walls, a low, vibrating pulse that seemed to reach into the crew's bones. Jonas leaned heavily on a console, his face pale but determined. Leah frantically adjusted her scanner, her fingers shaking as she deciphered the entity's energy patterns. "Leah, give me something," Elena ordered, her voice sharp and urgent. Leah swallowed hard, her eyes glued to the flickering symbols on her screen. "I think I've pinpointed its core," she said, her voice unsteady but growing firmer. "The energy signatures are converging near the main reactor. Whatever this thing is, it's feeding off the ship's power systems." Elena nodded, her mind racing. If it's feeding off the reactor, it must be tethered to it somehow. If we sever that connection, we might be able to weaken it, or even destroy it, Leah finished. Jonas winced as he straightened up, gripping his plasma rifle. "Then let's cut the cord. I'm not letting that thing turn us into its next meal." Elena glanced at him, her expression softening briefly. "Are you sure you're up for this? That thing nearly killed you." Jonas smirked, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've been through worse. Besides, I'm not sitting this one out." "Fine," Elena said, turning to the group. "We're heading to the reactor. Leah, keep that scanner running. I need constant updates on its position. Jonas, stay close and cover our rear. We're taking every weapon we've got, no holding back." The crew armed themselves with everything the armory had to offer: plasma rifles, energy grenades, and reinforced combat suits. Elena grabbed a pulse disruptor, a powerful device designed to disable electronic systems, a desperate gamble, but one she hoped would work against the entity. The team moved quickly through the ship's corridors, their boots clanging against the metal floor. The flickering lights and distant echoes of the entity's growls created an oppressive atmosphere, as though the ship itself were alive and hostile. As they approached the reactor chamber, Leah's scanner began to emit a series of rapid, high-pitched beeps. "It's here," she whispered, her eyes wide. "It knows what we're doing." Elena tightened her grip on her weapon. "Then it knows we're coming for it. Stay focused." The team entered the reactor chamber, a massive cylindrical room dominated by the ship's power core, a glowing, pulsating column of energy encased in a protective shell. The air was thick with heat and static, and the hum of the reactor was almost deafening. Leah pointed to a series of glowing symbols etched into the walls, identical to those they had seen earlier. "There," she shouted over the noise. "Those symbols are acting as conduits. They're channeling energy directly to the entity." Before Elena could respond, the shadows around the reactor began to shift and writhe. The entity emerged, larger and more menacing than before, its glowing eyes burning with malevolence. "It's protecting its source," Jonas yelled, opening fire. The plasma bolts struck the entity, momentarily dispersing parts of its form, but it reconstituted almost instantly. It lashed out with a shadowy limb, striking the console near Leah and sending sparks flying. Elena threw a grenade, the explosion briefly illuminating the chamber and forcing the entity to retreat. "Leah, how do we shut it down?" Leah frantically examined the symbols, her hands trembling as she typed commands into her scanner. "We need to overload the conduits. If we disrupt the energy flow, it'll destabilize." "Do it," Elena shouted, firing at the entity to keep it at bay. Leah connected her scanner to the reactor's control panel, her fingers moving with desperate precision. "I'm rerouting the energy now. Just hold it off a little longer." The entity roared, its form flickering as it lunged toward Leah. Jonas stepped in front of her, taking the brunt of the attack. The shadowy limb pierced his armor, and he screamed in pain, dropping to the ground. "Jonas," Elena shouted, her heart pounding. She unleashed a barrage of fire at the entity, forcing it to retreat again. "I've almost got it," Leah cried. The reactor's hum grew louder, and the glowing conduits began to pulse erratically. The entity shrieked, its form destabilizing as the energy flow was disrupted. It lashed out wildly, its shadowy limbs thrashing as it fought to maintain its hold. "Leah, now!" Elena yelled. Leah slammed her hand down on the control panel, initiating the overload. The reactor emitted a blinding burst of light, and the symbols on the walls shattered like glass. The entity let out an ear-splitting scream, its form unraveling and dissolving into the air. The room fell silent, save for the crackling of damaged consoles and the heavy breathing of the crew. Jonas lay on the ground, barely conscious but alive. Elena knelt beside him, her face grim. "We did it," she said softly. "But this isn't over. We need answers. Fast." Leah stared at the reactor, her expression a mix of relief and dread. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling, "if this was just the beginning, what else is out there?" Elena stood, her jaw set. "Whatever it is, we'll be ready." The silence after the entity's destruction felt oppressive, filled with unspoken questions and lingering dread. Elena stood in the reactor chamber, her gaze fixed on the faint scars left by the strange symbols. The pulsating hum of the reactor had quieted, but it still emitted a faint glow, stable for now. Jonas winced as Leah patched up his wounds, her hand steady despite her trembling nerves. "You make a good shield, Jonas," Leah muttered, forcing a weak smile. "Don't get used to it," Jonas replied, his voice laced with pain but humor intact. "I don't plan on making this a habit." Elena turned toward them, her expression hard. "We bought ourselves some time, but we're not safe yet. Whatever that thing was, it didn't get here by accident." Leah nodded. "Captain, I think the entity was part of something much bigger. The energy patterns I've been analyzing. They're too organized, too deliberate. This wasn't a random anomaly. It was sent." "Sent?" Jonas asked, sitting up straighter despite his injuries. "Like a scout," Leah continued, her voice hushed. "I think it was testing us, testing the ship." The weight of her words settled over the crew like a suffocating blanket. Elena clenched her fists, her mind racing. If this entity was a scout, then whoever or whatever sent it wasn't far behind. "Leah, keep analyzing those patterns," Elena ordered. "See if there's a signal or trace we can follow." "Jonas, rest up. We'll need every fighter ready. We're heading to the command deck." As the team made their way through the damaged corridors, Leah's scanner began to chirp again, the signals growing more erratic. "I don't like this," she said, her eyes darting nervously between the device and the walls around her. "There's still residual energy in the ship. It's like the entity left breadcrumbs, or a warning." When they reached the command deck, Elena called up the ship's main logs. The glowing terminal flickered as she navigated through weeks' worth of corrupted data, her brow furrowing deeper with each entry. "Most of these logs are scrambled," she muttered. "But here, this looks intact." The crew gathered around as a holographic projection filled the room. It showed a recording from the early days of the ship's journey. The image of a young, bright-eyed captain appeared, her voice confident and filled with hope. "This is Captain Mira Chandra of the colony ship Aurora. Our mission is to pioneer a new home for humanity, far beyond the known territories. Today, we pass into uncharted space." Elena fast-forwarded through the logs, skipping mundane entries until the tone shifted. Mira's face became drawn, her once hopeful demeanor replaced with exhaustion and fear. "We've encountered something," Mira said, her voice shaky. "It's not human. It's not natural. The crew is." She cut off as a loud, otherworldly shriek filled the recording. The scream crackled with static before the image returned. Mira's voice was now a whisper, her eyes wide with terror. "To whoever finds this, it's not a new world waiting for us. It's a trap. Turn back." The recording ended abruptly, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Jonas broke it, his voice grim. "A trap? For who?" "Us." Leah shook her head, her fingers flying over her scanner. "Not just us. Any ship that enters this region of space. She pointed to the holographic map displayed on the console. "Look at this. It's a pattern. Multiple colony ships disappeared in this sector over the last century. They were all lured here." Alina's jaw tightened, and whatever this is, it's been waiting, feeding, growing stronger. As the realization sank in, an alert blared through the ship, red lights flashing ominously. Leah's scanner lit up like a firework, the signal spiking into chaotic patterns. "They're coming," Leah whispered. The entity wasn't just a scout. It was a beacon. Alina stepped forward, her voice cutting through the panic. "We're not running. If they're coming, we'll face them head on. We'll figure out what they want, and we'll make sure they don't get it." Jonas grinned despite the tension, gripping his plasma rifle. "Now that's the captain I signed up for." The crew braced themselves as the ship's sensors picked up incoming signatures, multiple vessels, all emitting the same eerie energy as the entity. The trap was sprung, and humanity's pioneers were about to face the chaos that awaited them. The Aurora's command deck shook violently as the ship's sensors registered multiple incoming vessels. Red warning lights bathed the room in a grim glow, accompanied by the shrill blare of alarms. Alina steadied herself against the console, her eyes locked on the holographic display showing the approaching fleet. "They're here," Leah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The readings on her scanner were incomprehensible, spiking energy levels, fluctuating signals, and patterns that didn't adhere to any known technology. The shapes of the enemy ships became visible on the display, their jagged, asymmetrical designs pulsating with a dark, ominous energy. They seemed more alive than mechanical, their surfaces writhing and shifting as though organic. Jonas stepped forward, his plasma rifle slung across his back. "What the hell are we even looking at? Those don't look like ships. They look like creatures." Alina's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter what they are. They're hostile, and they're in our way." The largest of the enemy vessels suddenly emitted a piercing signal that echoed through the Aurora. Leah clutched her head, grimacing in pain as the sound seemed to invade her very mind. It's some kind of psychic attack." She managed to choke out. "Shut it down," Alina barked. Leah's fingers flew across the console, countering the signal with a burst of disruptive frequencies. The oppressive noise dissipated, but the ship's systems flickered in its wake. "We can't take many more of those," Leah warned. "Their technology or biology, whatever it is leagues beyond ours." "Then we hit them where it hurts," Alina said, her voice steely. "Leah, analyze their formations. Jonas, prep the weapon systems. We're not going down without a fight." Jonas grinned, his usual bravado masking the tension in his posture. "Finally, some action. Let's see how these things like a dose of humanity's finest." As the Aurora prepared for battle, the largest enemy vessel moved into position, its pulsating surface opening like a maw. A beam of searing light erupted from its core, narrowly missing the Aurora as Alina ordered evasive maneuvers. "Return fire," she commanded. The ship's plasma cannons roared to life, sending streaks of blue energy toward the enemy fleet. The projectile struck one of the smaller vessels, tearing through its shifting surface. The creature ship let out a sound, a horrifying guttural wail, as it disintegrated into a cloud of debris. "They can be hurt," Jonas said, his grin widening. "Good to know." But the victory was short-lived. The remaining vessels began to swarm, their movements unnervingly coordinated. Leah's console lit up with warning after warning. "Captain, they're adapting," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "Their energy signatures are changing. They're learning how to counter us." Alina's mind raced. "Leah, can you trace their signal? Find out where it's coming from." Leah nodded, her fingers dancing across the keys. "I'll try, but it's complicated. Their network is alive. It's like I'm fighting a living organism." "Then fight harder," Alina said. "If we can find their source, we might have a chance to stop this." As Leah worked, Jonas unleashed another volley of plasma fire, keeping the enemy ships at bay. The Aurora shuddered under the strain of multiple impacts, its shields barely holding. "Captain, I've got something," Leah shouted. "There's a central node, a command ship. It's broadcasting signals to the rest of the fleet. If we take it out, we might be able to disrupt their entire network." Elena's eyes narrowed as she studied the holographic display. The command ship was massive, its pulsating core radiating waves of energy that seemed to orchestrate the movements of the fleet. "Then that's our target," she said. "Jonas, prepare the torpedoes. Leah, give me a clear path. We're taking the fight to them." The crew sprang into action, their determination unwavering despite the odds. As the Aurora charged toward the command ship, Elena felt a surge of resolve. Humanity's pioneers would not falter. They had faced the chaos, and now they would strike back with everything they had. The battle for survival was far from over, but the crew of the Aurora was ready to face the storm head-on. The Aurora surged forward, its engines screaming as the ship weaved through the chaos of battle. Explosions lit up the void, and the crew felt every tremor as enemy ships struck their shields. Elena gripped the command console tightly, her voice cutting through the cacophony of alarms. "Leah, keep jamming their signals. Jonas, target their command ship's core. We need to end this now." Leah's fingers flew across her console, her mind racing to outmaneuver the alien network. The enemy's psychic presence was invasive, probing her thoughts like tendrils of darkness. She winced but refused to back down, channeling her focus into creating a digital counterattack. "I'm holding them off, but they're relentless," Leah said, beads of sweat forming on her brow. "Every second we get closer, their systems fight harder." "Then we'll push harder," Elena replied, her voice firm. "Jonas, status on the torpedoes." "Locked and loaded," Jonas said, his tone grim but determined. "Just say the word, Captain." The Aurora dodged another wave of enemy fire, its shields flickering dangerously. One of the smaller alien vessels attempted to intercept, but a well-placed plasma burst from Jonas's console sent it spiraling into oblivion. "We're in range," Leah shouted. "I've isolated their core signal. It's vulnerable, but only for a short window." Helena didn't hesitate. "Fire torpedoes." Jonas pressed the trigger, and the Aurora unleashed its payload. Two high-yield plasma torpedoes streaking toward the command ship. The alien vessel reacted immediately, its surface shifting like liquid as it deployed defensive drones to intercept. "Leah," Elena barked. "I'm on it," Leah responded, launching a series of decoy signals to scramble the drones. The torpedoes slipped through, weaving past the defenses like guided predators. The torpedoes struck the command ship's pulsating core, and for a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a blinding flash, the core imploded, sending a shockwave rippling outward. The enemy fleet faltered, their movements chaotic and uncoordinated. "They're breaking formation," Jonas shouted. Leah's console lit up with data. The network's collapsing. Whatever link they had to the command ship, it's gone. The remaining enemy vessels began to retreat, their ominous designs flickering like dying embers. A few exploded outright, unable to function without the central node. The once imposing fleet was now little more than scattered wreckage. Elena allowed herself a moment to breathe, her grip on the console loosening. "Status report." Leah exhaled deeply. "Their signals are fading. They're gone, Captain." Jonas leaned back in his chair, a grin breaking across his face. "Looks like humanity lives to fight another day." Elena surveyed the damage on the command deck, sparking consoles, exhausted faces, and the faint hum of damaged systems. Despite the chaos, a sense of victory filled the air. "Good work, everyone," she said, her voice steady but tinged with relief. "We're not out of the woods yet, but this was a win." As the Aurora drifted amidst the debris of the alien fleet, the crew began to piece together the remnants of their shattered journey. Leah's scans revealed faint traces of the alien technology, clues that could potentially unlock the mystery of their attackers. "We need to understand what we just faced," Leah said, her voice heavy with determination. "This wasn't random. They knew we were here." Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. "Then we'll find out who they are and why they came for us. Humanity has been knocked down before, but we always get back up." The crew of the Aurora turned their attention to rebuilding, knowing that their survival was only the first step. They had awakened to chaos, but now they carried the spark of hope. Humanity's pioneers were ready to reclaim their future.